Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Welcome, streamers. We are so very glad to have you streaming from all over the country. Great to have you. All of you who are in the room visiting, it's great to have you here. For those of you who are not on our mailing list, we would love to have you there. We send out an email blast to about 10 or 12,000. It may be 25,000 now, Gene. I don't know. Maybe 1 million of people every Thursday telling them what's going to happen in this room. If you would like to be on that mailing list, please sign up over here. There's a clipboard with green paper, and you can sign up there. Right next to where my books are. Yes, actually, that's a wonderful segue, Gene. Actually, I was going there next. You can find that at the book sale table. God Believes in Love, Straight Talk About Gay Marriage was the best book that's ever been written in the history of literature. And you can pick that up.
It's my second favorite book next to the Bible.
Yes, absolutely. And doesn't need as much editing as the Bible does either. I don't think they have your microphone on yet for reasons that I like.
Is it on now?
Oh, Lord.
Can you hear me in the back?
Yes.
I want to know whether the people behind me were chosen like they choose for Donald Trump or
Absolutely.
those people like...
Absolutely. There's no doubt about that. There's no doubt. We're going to get to them, too.
What does this say about my candidacy right here? It's like I'm going to lose. That's
You're
what it
sunk.
says.
Well, if I could regain control of my forum here for just a second, I would love to welcome everybody. Just a reminder that at All Saints Church we believe that your faith, your work, your worship is not completed until you act. You have to come to the sermon to hear about that. And today is a sign-on letter from me to the Archbishop of Canterbury and the presiding bishop, talking about the mess that we're in with the Anglican Communion, about which we will address in just a few moments. It is a thrill to have our speaker here, and I want to reiterate that it is about him, it is also about the movement, and it's also about the people who have been working with a long-haul, faithful, persistent, audacious, in-your-face perspective for 25 years. And so we have brothers and sisters who have flown themselves in from all over the country who've worked so hard with Gene and with all of us. And yes, and they are right here. Please stand, please stand, please stand, please stand, please stand. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Now that is amazing. Woo! Yes. I love you, Katie. Texas is in the house, too, y'all. I mean, Texas is in the house. So the book of Revelation talks about the 144,000, and these people are amongst the 144,000. And also parishioners who have co-led the Beyond Inclusion movement that led into claiming the blessing. And they are here, and I see Hannah Cully, yes, sitting here with her husband, and Peggy Adams is Peggy in the house. Anyway, we've got Jim White was there, and I want you to thank our own parishioners for courageous, 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 courageous work. So I'm not going to take up valuable time introducing Gene. He needs no introduction. But I do want to kind of get into the meat of the matter. So my first question has to do with his deepest learnings and relearnings as a walking witness of God's radically inclusive love. Now, we talked in the locker room just a little bit ago on the way in. He's already going to tell you the deepest learning in the sermon. For those of you who haven't been, you got to go there and learn that. But Gene, can we just kind of start there? And let's celebrate your deepest learnings and relearnings about your life and the way God has led you to be in the world.
He really could be Oprah. Such an Oprah-esque question, don't you think? So my biggest learning out of the last 12 years is that no matter how badly I am treated by someone else, it does not relieve me of my responsibility to treat them like the child of God they are. Oh, Lord. Right? Now, that takes a while to learn. Because what you want to do and what your natural inclination is to pound them in one place or another. And what I've learned is that returning love for hate is possibly the most powerful tool we have. I think more than anything I or any of us have said in this movement, it has always been more powerful how we have treated those who opposed us. I think that spoke louder than anything we said and has nothing to do with sexuality, right? And I can't tell you the number of times I've spoken, especially on college campuses. Invariably, somebody, some young person will get up, floppy Bible in hand, and read to me from the scriptures. I mean, you can count on it happening. And then I respond. No one remembers what I said, but almost everyone will comment on the respect with which I treated that person who was trying to tear me and my arguments down, right? So that just works everywhere, in the office, anywhere, on the road, at home, whatever, is that will be the most powerful witness, regardless of what the issue is. So just to say it again, that no matter how badly I am treated by someone, it never relieves me of the responsibility to treat them like the child of God they are. And I mean, you can also kind of have fun with it, right? So when the Archbishop of Nigeria said that gay people were lower than the dogs, and the Archbishop of Kenya said that when Gene Robinson was consecrated a bishop, Satan entered the church. I just made a point in my public speaking to mention that those two guys and I were going to be in heaven together. Now, the enjoyment of just entertaining the notion of how they would react to that is like worth the price of admission, right? But what's kind of nice is that I actually believe that, you know? I always used to say, they'll probably be more surprised to see me than I will be to see them. But there will be, and we will have figured it all out because God won't have it any other way, and it'll all be okay. And I just believe that with my whole heart. And hopefully people saw me treating them that way, even without having the fun that I had with it. So.
Beautiful. Any other learnings before I move on to my next Oprah question?
So let me tell you what I've learned since my retirement as the Bishop of New Hampshire. I've moved to Washington. I'm a senior fellow at a think tank about a block from the White House. What I've learned there is the world doesn't revolve around the Episcopal Church. No, really, I'm serious. It just doesn't, you know? So actually, in addition to that, what I've learned is you never know where the next mission field is going to be, right? I mean, I'm just a I'm just a Protestant evangelical at heart, right? I added the Episcopal on top of it, but down underneath, I'm still the evangelical. So I get to this thoroughly secular think tank, progressive liberal think tank, the Center for American Progress. It was begun in 2003 by John Podesta. So I'm there with about 200 or 300, mostly 20 and 30 somethings, right? I mean, Washington is run by 20 and 30 somethings. I mean, you hear about the few people on top, but the people who run Washington are mostly 20 and 30, and almost all of them are gay. I'm not kidding. Even on the Republican side of the aisle on Congress, they're all gay. You know? And they know it. They know it. They just won't admit it. Anyway, so we had this amazing experience that happened. So two people on my team, the LGBT team, a 28-year-old transgender man and a 26-year-old transgender woman. Andy was a lawyer, really wrote the regulations for transgender health care, and in those states and the District of Columbia where transgender people are included in the health care, he's just laid the groundwork for all the following sort of generations. So he had cancer, had chemo, came back to work, was great. A year ago, August, he goes to the doctor with a little cough that wouldn't seem to go away, and was given 2 weeks to live. So they called me up and said, "Will you marry us?" And I said that I would be delighted. So in 4 days, we put together a wedding. It was sort of like, you get the tables and chairs, you get the flowers, you get, we even talked about starting a business called Wedding in a Box. Like, just give us a week, we'll make it fabulous, right? So on that Sunday, we had the wedding up on the roof. We weren't sure if Andy was going to make it or not. And he did rally. He was there. He was fully present. By the next morning, every time he moved, he went into a convulsion. We got him to Johns Hopkins Hospital and stayed with him until he died on Thursday. And then those of us who had planned the wedding planned his funeral. And I officiated. We buried him out of St. Thomas in DuPont Circle. So the head of CAP, the Center for American Progress, who had been at the funeral, asked me if I would do something for the staff. So I have about 200, 250, 20 and 30-somethings show up, right, for the something. I've got Sikhs and Hindus and Muslims and Jews and Christians and a lot of nuns, you know what I mean? Who would not identify with any kind of religious tradition. Most of them had not lost a grandparent, and never mind a parent, never mind somebody their own age. And here's a 28-year-old who's died. So I do this thing, candles work for everybody. So you got candles. And so what I said to them, I decided to treat them like adults, right? Actually, it's kind of a rare thing in the church. We all too often talk down to people. So what I said to them was, look, Andy was Christian, and so I'm going to say some Christian prayers. And I totally get that you are all these other things, or perhaps come out of no faith tradition at all. So I'll just trust that you can make whatever changes in your own mind to bridge that, and think of it in your own religious tradition, whatever that is, or just think of it however you want. But this was Andy's tradition, and that's what we'll use. So here's the surprise and the learning. I've become a chaplain in this completely, thoroughly secular place, right? I'm the only ordained person in any liberal think tank in D.C. All of the conservative think tanks have them, have ordained people on staff. I'm the only one on the liberal side because most liberals run kicking and screaming in the opposite direction, right? And but these 20 and 30-somethings insist on calling me Bishop Gene. I thought I would never wear my collar to work there. I never not wear my collar to work there. And I feel like I've become a chaplain. So you just never know when God is going to put a mission field in front of you. So it's great.
So you don't have to stay long in responding to this next question, but it really is stimulated in my mind by the Podesta group there. We got a brother who's coming in here next week to talk about racism and white supremacy. And one of his major arguments is that we thought we had had all these victories in the 60s, and now we feel that we are regressing on absolutely every one of them, from voting rights to everything else. And his argument is that as soon as the 64 Voting Rights Act was established, that the conservatives got together in a small room and said, we have got to create a competing narrative against that. And that's the narrative that this country has been running on. And the question is your group working to create a counter-narrative so that we can, because I know you are not a one-issue human being. The great thing is that Gene and I were working as priests in the Episcopal Church long before we came together around this issue in formation, actually. And he's always been a justice person with the entire agenda. Just speak to that about what's happening in our country with a narrative that includes everybody and believes in justice for all, but not for the refugees or the Muslims or that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I think around this notion that after the Voting Rights Act, we tried to undo it. It is not unlike what happened in the Roman Catholic Church following the death of John XXIII. Pope John XXIII, remember, called the Second Vatican Council, put all of these changes in place, and he wasn't even cold yet when they started to undo as much of his legacy as possible. And so I think it's really important to remember that just because people change their language does not necessarily indicate they have changed their hearts, right? And certainly people in the LGBT community know that. And I think one of the places that I actually agree with Donald Trump is the sort of the we would describe it differently, but that there's a danger with political correctness, which is that people can sound like they are not fill in the blank, racist, sexist, homophobic, whatever, without actually having changed at all. And I think that's what we're seeing. So everybody here on the stage with me knows, and I'm sure most of you know, that in terms of a narrative, I would say that the word that describes our work at this point is intersectionality, right? I know it's an overused word, but what I take it to mean is that you always start with your own story and your own experience, and then you look for the connections in other places. I mean, I've always said, except for being gay, I'm like your worst nightmare, right? I'm white, I'm male, I'm old, I'm all of that.
Southern.
Now right there is a cross to bear. Right?
Yes.
But I've always been grateful to God for being gay, because it has been the tiniest window into what it must be like to be a woman, to be in a wheelchair, to be a person of color, to be, just fill in the blank, right? So it's not, since I'm near the film capital of the world, it's what kind of acting? They call it
Method acting.
Yeah, I think it's method acting, where you find a piece of yourself that connects with the character you're playing, and then you kind of build it out from there. So I think that's our only hope at this point, is to both get good at understanding our own story, to be self-reflective, and then to look for the places where our story intersects other stories. And to do that with a lot of humility, right? So there is something really not humble about when you hear somebody say Black Lives Matter, to say, yeah, but all lives matter. That is, you are not listening, right? And if you don't know why that is offensive, then you ought to find a person of color and ask them, and then shut your mouth and listen, right? The way, frankly, I think Bernie Sanders did. The first time the Black Lives Matter movement confronted him, he really looked like a deer caught in the headlights, right? And before too long, he had listened. And at least his language really indicated somebody different. But I would say that whoever said that race was the cancer on the body politic got it right. It still is. And I think it is the greatest threat to all that I think we love and hope for. So take the intersectionality really, really seriously. Reflect on your own story, and then look for places in what is happening for intersections, whether it be around immigrants or Syrian refugees or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Great. So I want to talk about what you're doing now and go into the future, but let's have a moment of just acknowledging, and to the degree that we can celebrate it and also lament where we aren't, our accomplishments. We've got a huge agenda item. Now let's talk about the agenda item that has brought us here today. Where are we in terms of radically full inclusion of LGBTQ brothers and sisters in the church and in the culture? Let's just mark that right now.
So I'll tell you what you already know, which is that we have made great strides in terms of gay and lesbian people and our rights and our respect and so on. And it actually, that great theologian Aretha Franklin got it right.
Yes.
It is about RESPECT,
yes.
It really is. It's not just a gay divas song. It's like what it's about. But I would be very quick. This is the biggest thing going on in LGBT organizations at the moment, which is convincing the people who funded our movement up until now, who were mostly gay, wealthy, white men. The great fear is that now that we have marriage equality, those funders will say, well, we've got all we need. We're done. Now let's support the symphony instead. Right? Nothing wrong with the symphony, but the fact of the matter is things are pretty good for urban gay and lesbian people, but they are not so great for people around the country. I will say bisexual people still rarely get mentioned. I'll come back to transgender in a minute. God loved transgender people and queer people who are putting forward the notion that is really unnerving to people, which is that there are more boxes than male and female, right? And I think the anxiety and the fear comes from, oh my God, if we let go of those two boxes and we open this up, there will be no end to it. It will be out of control. Right? And that's why I think we see the resistance. Let me also name something that never gets named, which are intersex people. Now, I was in Australia doing a speaking and book tour a couple of years ago. The intersex community there is organized, out, loud, in your face, and if you say LGBT or LGBTQ and don't put an I on it, they will interrupt your speech and tell you. Right? We never talk about that. We never talk about that. We've got...
Yeah, spend a minute on it.
Yeah.
Spend a minute on it there.
So we have got a bunch of people in this country who were born with characteristics of both male and female, sometimes both sets of genitalia. Sometimes they have male genitalia and ovaries. And until now, and until we begin to talk about this a little more, a doctor would often decide which sex that person was going to be, or the parents would decide which sex that person was going to be, and at about age 50 or 60, the parent says, "Oh, sweetheart, we never told you that you were." Maybe that's why you don't feel like a man, right? So we've got families that are dealing with this, but we never talk about that. These folks in Australia are saying, God made us this way for a reason, and you might want to know what it is we have to teach you. You know? Yeah. And it's very similar to what we're experiencing around transgender people. So I've just written a new resource. It just literally this past Tuesday, we sort of introduced it to the world, and you can find it online. It's called Transgender Welcome, A Bishop Makes the Case for Affirmation. And it's about if you were going to make the case for transgender inclusion, both in the culture and in the church and synagogue, what scripture would you use? And what theology would you use? So just give you a couple little tantalizing, I hope, moments. One is I have learned more about eunuchs than I thought was ever possible or desirable, right? But the transgender community believes that many of them were transgender, actually. And it's interesting, in the Gospels, Jesus, in a discussion about marriage, mentioned there are three kinds of eunuchs. People who were eunuchs from birth, people who other people made them eunuchs, and three was people who chose to be a eunuch, right? It's the only place in Scripture where we have genitalia being messed around with to see how they were treated. And here's what it turns out. In the Hebrew Scriptures, what we call arrogantly the Old Testament, the arc is from exclusion to inclusion. Turns out they're excluded from the assembly of the Lord early on. And when the Hebrews are in captivity in Babylonia, when Isaiah tells them what is waiting for them when Jerusalem is restored, eunuchs are named as being heirs to that new temple in Jerusalem. So the arc is this way. And of course, in the New Testament, we have a great story about the Ethiopian eunuch in the book of Acts, where Philip encounters the Ethiopian eunuch, and ultimately the eunuch says, "So what's to keep me from being baptized?" And you can almost read between the lines that Philip is trying to think of every possible reason to exclude him, and he just can't come up with it. And he says, "Well, all right, here's some water. Let's do this, you know." And so it's at the same time, of course, that Peter is having the dream about food and keeping kosher and all of that. It's not what you put in your body, but what comes out, and so on and so forth. So you have this arc, again, from exclusion to inclusion. So we talk a lot about eunuchs. So, but here's the other thing, and I just love this. So the creation story that most people know is the first one, right? Starts with Genesis 1:1. And it's pretty straightforward. God he says, like, okay, on Monday I'm going to do this, and on Tuesday I'm going to do that, and then on Wednesday I'm going to do that. And after each one of them, he steps back and says, you know what, that is really good. And in that story, God creates them male and female. Boom, right out of the gate. In the second creation story, which begins just a few verses into chapter 2, God does not create them male and female. God creates the Adam, which is actually where we get the name Adam. But God doesn't create a man named Adam. God creates the Adam, which is probably best translated as the earthling, right? Or the human thing. No gender is mentioned. And then the first problem occurs in Eden. We think of Eden being perfect. It was not perfect because the Adam, the human thing, was lonely. And God does not seem to know what will make the human thing happy. And that's when he brings the animals to Adam, presumably hoping it will cure his loneliness. Now, there are a couple of rabbis in the 2nd and 3rd century that went as far as to say that they thought that Adam had sex with all of them. I didn't put that in the curriculum. Okay? I have enough people mad at me already, right? But the point is, after Adam, after the Adam, the human thing, sees all the animals, the Genesis account says, but he was still lonely. It didn't help. That's when God gets the idea of putting him to sleep, taking a rib, and when he sees this other earthling, he says, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, and all of a sudden we have male and female, right? Eve doesn't get named till much later, and the Adam becomes Adam. So what I take from that is that each of us is a co-creator with God of ourselves, a co-creator of ourselves. God does a goodly portion of it, but God imparts part of God's self, which includes the authority to make ourselves who we are. Adam gets to decide what makes him happy and who makes him happy. Right? That does not get decided for him, and there is even evidence that God doesn't seem to know what will make the earthling happy. And so the earthling gets to decide, and gay people get to decide, and lesbian people get to decide, and transgender people get to decide, right? It's a very high theology of humankind, right? It's not the groveling, sniveling, weak, pleading, begging human. It's the human who has been invited by the God of all that is to be a co-creator with God of what you're going to be. So it's a very high bar, right? But this sort of notion of agency. We normally think of the gift of free will as you've got two choices before you and you get to choose between the good one and the bad one, right? But I think it's much deeper than that. Agency is about taking responsibility for your own life, seizing the authority that is rightfully yours and exercising it. And so that's what we see with transgender people.
Wonderful. So I got in from a trip to Macon, Georgia this morning at 1 o'clock. And I helped preach the funeral of my main mentor, father figure in college. And he was a civil rights activist. And one of the theses of his life was that any accomplishment you have is to be considered the prelude to the next work, that you work with God. And he really believed that human progress does not roll in on wheels of inevitability, but you have to be a co-worker with God, to quote the Birmingham jail letter. Where are we, Gene, now? What's our prelude for our next work? In the Anglican Communion, in the Episcopal Church, in life at large? Tell us about what you see as the future of work that we're co-working with God.
Before I try to answer that, let me just say that I often get people who will say, like, when is this going to all be over? Like, when is all the turmoil going to end? And, you know, my only response is, I don't have good news for you. Because as soon as we welcome LGBT people, and begin treating them like the human beings they are, the children of God that they are, God is going to point out somebody else we've missed, right? And God is going to keep doing that until we get it right? And then we'll all be in heaven. It's something that we coddle ourselves into thinking isn't true, that God is just going to keep doing this to us. So, really, get used to it, because it's gonna happen again and again and again until we get it right? So it seems to me that in terms of what's coming next, I believe in terms of our movement, the transgender movement. I mean, this is a pivotal moment. The transgender community thinks of Caitlyn Jenner as a net positive. There are some negative things. By the way, and when I watched the interview with the last time Bruce showed up, right, and Diane Sawyer, I was just perturbed with Caitlyn. I was disturbed by the interview, and I didn't like it one bit. Well, I did like it some, but I was mostly negative about it. And about a week later, I realized why, which was I wanted her to be polished, well-spoken, articulate. I wanted her to have figured it all out and then lay it out for the American public. And instead, what actually turns out to be brilliant is she showed us a person in progress, right? An unfinished project. And at the end of the day, we're all unfinished, right? And how brave of her to show us her imperfected self, rather than pretend to be perfected. So what initially turned me off, I just got very excited about. But I think, and I will also predict that for all that gay and lesbian people have taught us, all of us, we have much more to learn from transgender people. And like I said, I think it's going to be hard. We already see the religious right acknowledging that they lost the gay thing, right? So now they're turning their sights on transgender people, and as you read about, they used transgender people in Houston to overturn the Houston Equal Rights Ordinance, showing ads of creepy old men with lipstick on following young girls into the girls' bathroom, right? I mean, it was disgusting, but that's where we are, because they know that they lost the gay thing. So that's one place. I do believe that as crucial and pivotal as race has always been for America, we are entering a period in which we are going to either get it more right or something awful is going to happen. I think it has the potential for unraveling America completely. And if we don't get it right, we deserve that, really. And as white people, we have got to get serious about racism. Most of the white people in this room are at least recovering racists. And here's why I say recovering. So I don't know if this is true. I'm not a technological wizard. But in the old days of technology, there were default settings on your computer. Like if you didn't intentionally go in and change something, this was what was going to happen when you pushed that button. I think of racism as like my default setting. That unless I intentionally, every day, every hour, every minute, every situation, go in and change the default setting, I'm apt to act that way, right? And so I think as white people, a good place for us to start is to realize what our default settings are, and to get ever more conscious about changing them. So I would say race.
So before I say goodbye to you and say a personal word to you, I just want you all to take that in, what Gene just said. We're spending from 9 until 1 next Saturday with Tim Wise talking about what our default setting is around racism. And if you really do believe what Gene just said, that it could be the undoing of this nation and of all of us if we don't change racism, I want you to go to the sign-up center before you leave the campus today and sign up for that seminar next Saturday from 9 until 1 and be here and learn from Tim Wise, and then he'll be here talking with us also in the forum. Now, Gene.
Let me just, one other thing. There are lots of great books on racism, but I urge you to read Ta-Nehisi Coates' new book, which is written as a letter to his son. It's actually quite short, but let me tell you, it is slow reading because you can read a paragraph and it just sets you back on your heels.
Between the World and Me.
Yeah, Between the World and Me. It's just, read it and struggle with it because there is just lots of true stuff in it.
So, Gene, this is the last time I get to say something like this to you. You mean a lot to All Saints Church. You mean... You are one of our walking lights, luminaries, exemplars, and you inspire the hell out of us, and you call us to go into God's uncomfort zone, and we always want to go with you, and we thank you for being who you are. Thank you. Let's thank Gene Robbins.